Got it. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, depending where are you. We are grateful to see you there, and we are honored that today we have Carlota from Doughnut Economics Action Lab, from such a great organization that is pushing forward a new innovative economic setup, which I believe will conquer the minds of cities and regions very soon. I hope for that, and we are pleased to share their concept, their knowledge today. So thank you very much again, Carlota, for agreeing to join us. And well, the screen is yours.
Great. Well, it's lovely. Yeah, lovely to be here. Hi, everyone. Let me just get the technical things up and running, because it's always still always a bit of a moment. Okay, so I'm going to be sharing my screen, and we'll start.
Yeah.
But yeah, no it's rush. Absolutely a pleasure to be here all with you. Yeah, as Roma said, I'm Carlota Sanz, and I'm a co-founder of Doughnut Economics Action Lab, where we are trying to turn the ideas of this new economic mindset, Doughnut Economics, into practice, with the aim, or the big ambitions, of co-creating economies where people and planets can thrive in balance. So I'm going to be speaking today a little bit about what we're doing in the lab, but I want to start by first sharing a bit with you why I believe that the 20th century economics is not fit for purpose. And I'm going to do it through pictures, because I think that pictures are very powerful, and they can profoundly shape what we see and what we don't in the world. So if we think of the first image of the 20th century economics, which I actually believe is still the first image taught in many universities worldwide, then this is, of course, the cross between supply and demand. And I think that this is a very extraordinary place to start, because it's like saying, well, welcome to economics, the art of household management, and here's the market. Because by doing that, what we're doing is we're putting the market at the very center of our vision, and we're putting the price as the metric of concern, which means that anything that falls outside the price contract is an externality. So we're finding ourselves in this absurd situation in the 21st century, where we are witnessing much of the death of the living world, and yet economists still refer to this as an environmental externality. So I think that this should be bringing alarms from day one. This is definitely a framing that it's outdated for our times. But secondly, we have also the selfie of humanity, the self-portrait. Who are we? And very often we're still showing up in many of the traditional economic models as this rational economic man, which looks a little bit like this. So it's a man, for sure, standing alone with no dependence, with money in his hand, ego in his heart, and a calculator in his head. And of course, nature at his feet. So this man hates work, he loves luxury, he knows exactly the price of everything and what he wants at every point in his life. And the real danger that I see with him is that the more that students learn from him, the more they admire and try to mimic his traits. So research says that students say they value more competition and self-interest over altruism and collaboration as they go from one year to next year of their economic degrees. So who we tell ourselves we are profoundly shapes who we become. And lastly, very important, what's the goal? What's the goal of economics? And the goal is so deeply rooted, and it's never even drawn, but it's really invoked in every textbook, in every speech of politicians. And it's that goal of endless growth of GDP. And yet this is a very bizarre goal as well, because we have economies today that are richer than any economies have ever been before. And still our economists believe that our success lies in more GDP growth, regardless of whether these economies are indeed resulting in thriving people and planet. And I think that a lot of this mindset has brought us to where we are today. In fact, if we step back a bit and we think of how the 21st century has begun, then we see that it's begun with a lot of crisis, right? So from the financial crisis in 2008 that impacted the world in one way or another, we're living in the era of climate collapse. And more recently, we're experiencing the hardness of the crisis generated by the global pandemic of COVID-19. And I see that these crises are hitting the world hard and highlighting the great inequalities that persist of race and gender, of wealth and power between some countries and others. But very important is to see that these crises show us that we are deeply interconnected with each other and with the rest of the living world. And they show us that the crises arise from the very systems that we humans have created. So with this picture in mind, what I think is that we need a new vision for the 21st century. And funny as it sounds, I'm going to offer it with the shape of a donut. So what is the donut? Let's think of it as a compass for human prosperity in the 21st century, where the aim is to leave no one falling short of the essentials of life, those in the hole in the middle. So no one should be falling short of water, food, health, education. Now, all of these were actually crowdsourced from the world's governments, from the Sustainable Development Goals, which means that all the governments in the world have agreed that every person has a claim in meeting these essential needs. So no one falling short from these essential needs, but at the same time, and this is a very big but, we cannot overshoot the ecological ceiling. And the ecological ceiling is made out of 9 planetary boundaries, which are Earth's life-supporting system that keep this delicately balanced planet a sweet home for humanity and all species here with us. So the aim is to meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planets, and therefore live inside of that safe and just space that the donut offers. Now, if this is the goal, this is the new goal, the truth is that we are very far from reaching it right now, because all the red in this image shows the extent to which people are falling short of the essentials of life and the extent to which humanity is already in overshoot of these planetary boundaries. So billions of people are falling short of the essentials of life. For instance, in terms of food, there is still an 11% of the world's population that still doesn't have enough food to eat today. And while there's still human deprivation worldwide, we have already overshooted 4 of the planetary limits. So climate change is hitting harder and sooner. There's been excessive use of fertilizers on Earth, excessive land conversion, and catastrophic biodiversity loss. So the challenge that we have in the 21st century is to eliminate all the red that we're seeing in this page and enter the donut from both sides. And this has never been tried before. We are the first generation to see this picture and to realize that if we want to tackle this new problem, then we need new solutions, because the last century's economic theories, conventional business models, or even traditional development policies were simply not designed to address this challenge. And so this image shows the world as a whole. However, a lot of the policies take action at a national level. So let's see what happens when we go and we see what happens at the country level. Now, a group of researchers in the University of Leeds quantified 150 national donuts, showing the national resource use associated with achieving a good life for their population. So I brought here 3 examples. On the one hand, we have Rwanda. So they are living within its fair share of planetary boundaries. However, it's massively falling short on meeting the people's needs. And the question here is, how can the country meet everyone's needs without overshooting these boundaries? At the other side of the spectrum, we have countries like Australia, for instance, which they are meeting everyone's needs, but they're massively overshooting on almost, well, all of the planetary boundaries. So the question here is, how can a country like this come back to planetary boundaries while still meeting everybody's needs? And of course, these countries still have challenges in the social side, but this is taking a very low global social bar. And it's also interesting to see how the red that goes outside Australia's boundaries is not resources that are mined or produced in Australia. It's all the resources that are embedded in their food, in their clothing, in the electronics, in construction materials that have been imported into this country. And then we have countries that are in the middle. And for instance, we have Ukraine in this part, where there is still falling short on some of the essential needs of the people. So we haven't still completed that social foundation. But the truth is that we're already overshooting some of the planetary boundaries. So the challenge here is, how can Ukraine meet the needs of all people while already coming back within planetary boundaries? And this research, of course, has used international comparable data taken from the UN data sets. So it's not showing exactly how each of these countries are looking like, but this is not the aim of the research. What this research shows us is a really interesting global pattern. So if we put these three countries together with the rest of the countries, then what we see is that we have a place where we want to go, which is at the top left-hand corner, where we've met the needs of all people within the means of the planet. And what we immediately see is that actually we don't have any country close. And what we realize then is that there's no such thing as developed countries or developing countries in the traditional sense, in the sense that every country is still in an unprecedented journey to this space. So the countries below in the left, they need to progress in order to meet the needs of all people without pursuing the same extraordinary, degrading and exploitative processes that other countries have pursued before. And how can they do that? What finance and assistance and technology and transformation of global trade rules they need, or we owe them to make this possible. In the middle of the countries, in the middle of the picture, where we have middle income countries, these countries have the double whammy of actually meeting the people's needs for the first time while respecting coming back to planetary boundaries. And this is very interesting because many of these countries are really at a very pivotal moment of putting massive infrastructure, housing, transport, energy, communications. So they need to make the really good infrastructural choices so that they pivot towards the future that we want, rather to unlock them into the old one that we've been having until now. And then finally, the richest countries in the world right now, they need to sustain good lives for their people while reducing massively the overweight they've put on the living planet. And this has never been done before either. All three are in an unprecedented journey to this new space. And so it means that countries need to have humility and ambition to make this happen. So wherever the country it is, transformative changes and a new economic mindset is needed to help us tackle these problems. And lastly, I'm going to point something very important in this picture, which is that these countries are showing like separate dots in their own journey. But of course, all of these countries are very deeply intertwined and interrelated through history, through colonialism, through the ongoing relationships of military power, the structural adjustment rules imposed by the World Bank in the 80s, the finance and trade rules that still are imposed through international institutions, the ongoing resource extraction and land grabs, and the current and future impacts of climate change. And predominantly, all of these are powers from the high-income countries impacting upon the lower-income countries. And so we need to see transformation in every nation, but also within the relationships of nations. So I've presented the global concept of the donuts, and we've also looked at some of the implications at a national level. And I want to continue now looking at what we've started doing at Doughnut Economics Action Lab, which is bringing this concept into a place and a city level. And this is where we've started to put these ideas into practice. So the big question, can we live in the donuts? And this is a question I want to explore now. And for that, I want to open the donuts and unroll it so that we can create a space where we can begin to envision the future that we want, bringing in our minds the social foundation and the ecological ceiling, but also thinking of what it means to thrive here in our city and our relationships with the rest of the world. So this is a space where we can start to really imagine and recognize new possibilities. So let's go into this new space. We've created a framework and a question to ask the most ambitious cities in the 21st century. So I'm going to invite you to listen it from the lens of the city or the town where you live. How can our city become a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people in the world and the health of the whole planet? And we break this question into four main questions, which has a local and global side and a social and ecological side. We call this the four lenses of the city portrait. So let me start with the first question. How can all people in our city thrive? How can we ensure that all the residents in this place are healthy with nutritious food, clean water, good health, decent housing? How can all the residents be connected? Through internet connectivity, urban mobility, a sense of community, access to culture. And how can all the residents be empowered with good education, decent work, sufficient income, access to affordable energy? And how can they be empowered with a political voice, social equity, diversity, peace, justice? And these are all questions for the people in this place. And of course, they can only be answered by the people of this place. So this is a space that provides the opportunity for a collective conversation about what it means to have a decent life here. Now, the second question puts the city in its natural context. So how can our city thrive within the natural habitat? How can our city thrive here? Which biome is part of? What is nature's genius where we are? How does nature sequester carbon and store groundwater? How does it house biodiversity or cool the climate from the treetops to the forest floor? And what would it mean for the city to actually aim to be as generous as the wildland next door? And likewise, sequester carbon, house biodiversity, and store groundwater. So this is a very ambitious question for the cities of the 21st century. But both of these questions are setting our local aspirations to be thriving people in a thriving place. What we need also is to set this local aspiration into a context of global responsibility, because we know that every town, every city in the world draws resources from elsewhere in the planet. So the third question, we say, how can our city respect the health of the whole planet? So where is the timber coming from? Where is the food coming from? The water resources? Where are the carbon emissions being emitted around the world in the name of the prosperity of this place? So this is all about coming within planetary boundaries in our cities. How can we reduce the impact on climate change, the use of fertilizer, the water use, and the land conversion? And not only think about the ecological impact of these products that are imported into the city, but also we need to think of the social impacts that we have through the production and supply chains. So the fourth and last question that we bring to the table is, how can our city respect the well-being of all people? Who stitched and sewed the clothes that we're wearing? Who picked and packed the food that we buy? Who dug and transported the minerals that build our homes and our city buildings? And how can their rights also be respected and those of the communities in which they live? So these four lenses make up what we call the city portrait. And we started the work at Doughnut Economics Action Lab by creating city portraits initially with 3 cities, Philadelphia, Amsterdam, and Portland. These photographs were, of course, taken before the pandemic in 2019, where we had workshops inviting the city officials of these cities to actually sit around their portraits of their own place. And what we found in these workshops is that sitting in front of their own city portrait was actually so empowering. Each person, each city official could recognize their issue, their sector, and see it in the context of a whole, and drew new connections, new synergies, new possibilities that weren't visible before, when the city was working in a much more siloed way. So it was really, really inspiring to see how this city portrait bring a space for completely different and more holistic conversations. So the question, of course, is how can cities get then into the donuts? And I think we need to transform fundamentally two dynamics of our economies and create economies that are distributive by design and regenerative by design. So I'm going to deep dive a bit into these concepts. Firstly, we have to recognize that we have inherited a degenerative industrial system where industries take Earth's materials, they make them into stuff. We use them for a while, sometimes only once, and then we throw them away. And this linear take, make, use, lose dynamic is what's pushing us out of planetary boundaries. And we need to turn this into a regenerative and cyclical system by design, where we use our resources far more collectively, far more carefully, far more creatively. So I'm going to bring some of the examples that we're seeing in cities that are trying to bring these dynamics into practice. For instance, the city of Curitiba, since 1970s, they've been pioneering rapid transport, which makes long-scale distance available and affordable for many people and far faster and smarter than traveling by car. And they've been inspiring cities worldwide. They're now also going into introducing electric buses. But also think of cities like Paris, for instance, where during lockdown, they took the advantage of empty streets and shifted lanes from cars to cycles and massively expanded the number of cycling routes. So all over the world, again, they're starting to do this. And this is not only cleaning the air, but it's also making transport much more pleasant, safer, and affordable for many people. Think of Amsterdam, where, for instance, they are introducing very ambitious circular strategies. They're including circular building codes in their strategy. So they're requiring to reduce by half the number of raw materials that are being used in the city by 2030. So this means that the construction has to transform, and resources from buildings will have to be removed and reused again and again. So this picture shows a building in Amsterdam that it's not glued shut or nothing, it's cemented or locked. It's actually clicked and bottled together, which means that when the life of the building is over, then it will be able to be unbottled and unclicked and used again in a new way. But also Medellin in Colombia. They have brought biomimicry and nature back to the heart of the city, opening up the river and making river parks throughout the city. So they're making it a place for people to gather, to be together, and they're bringing back nature through the natural flow of that river into the heart of the city. So these are just some examples of what bringing regenerative design traits into cities would look like. But what about distributive by design? Well, we also have to recognize that the 20th century economies have been designed in many ways through technology, through regulation, in ways that have tended to concentrate value and opportunity in the hands of a few. And this is why in the last decade, we're also seeing the number of billionaires increasing from 1,000 to 2,000 people. So opportunity continues to be concentrated in the very richest of hands. And so what we need is to co-create societies, economies that are distributed by design, so that opportunity and value is shared far more equitably in society with those who co-create it. So a few examples of what this would look like in practice. Preston, for instance, in the UK, I think this is a great example of a city that is using the power of anchor institutions such as hospitals, schools, museums, to buy on long-term contracts from local suppliers. And they're also supporting and enabling the formation of cooperatives. And so it's an example of how the city is using their procurement power to create and build the network of small and social and medium enterprises in that city. But also, for example, we have an example like Vienna. Few people know that over 60% of Vienna's residents live in social housing, which is owned either by the city municipality itself or it's subsidized through cooperatives. And that means that the vast majority of people can live in high quality, affordable housing, which makes it really much more affordable to live than any other city in high income places in the world. But then we have also the importance of living wages. So Seattle in the United States was one of the first cities to introduce the living wage of $15 an hour. And this enabled everyone in the city to be certain of earning a decent minimum wage. And of course, living wages are not only important in the place where you live or in high income countries, they should be recognized through all the global supply chain. So what would it mean to actually recognize living wages throughout supply chains? I think that is a very ambitious question that not only cities, but multinational companies should be asking themselves. And finally, this is a really nice example. I love Bogota. I think they've recognized that there can be public luxury in small spaces, and they have turned these parking lots into a playground, making this space available for people, for the community. So they're really also building that fabric of society and open it and creating community wealth in the place. So we need to be regenerative by design and distributive by design. But also, cities can recognize and enable our multiple economic identities. And this is the diagram which I use to start economics, because it recognizes that the economy is embedded within society, and they are a social construct, so we can design and redesign the economy. But also it recognizes that society, it's part and it's embedded in the living world. And the living world, obviously, it's drawing in Earth's materials and matter, and it puts out waste and pollution. So this gives a much more holistic view of what an economy is. And if we deep dive into that part of the economy, we also see how mainstream economics starts economics with the supply and demand and in the market, right? Which is the first graph that I showed before. And in relation to this market, we stand like consumers or producers. And also with respect to production, we are either labor or capital. So we mainly show up as this rational economic man. And I think we are far more than this market player, because in relation to the state, we can be public servants, voters, teachers, health workers, residents, protesters. And these are all very crucial roles that we also play in relation to the state. And if we look at these two, we can see how in the 20th century, there was almost an ideological match. We either had to be free market or socialist economies. And I think that this ideological fight was so consuming that people lost sight of the two other fundamental forms of provisioning, which are essential to the well-being of people. So the first, the household, where we all begin every day. We may be parents, relatives, childs. This is the space of unpaid caring labor traditionally done by women. So we are cooking, cleaning, whipping, getting the children ready for school, looking after the sick, doing it one day after the other. But also the commons, where people get together through not through the market, not through the state, but through community, co-creating goods and services that we value, often without having to exchange even money. We may be volunteers, share, co-creators, stewards. And I think that if we think on GDP and accounting, we see how these only focus on the monetary value generated through the market and the state, but we completely miss the value that has been created in the household or the commons. And I think this was really evident with COVID. So when the market closed, it became all of a sudden very important to look at all the other roles, right? So the roles of key workers were key to keep the society going, but also the weight that went into the households in taking care of the children at school, at home, but also the sick, the people that were getting sick. And I think there was also a huge rediscover of what community and the commons were. We were trying to look after our neighbors, our families, throughout joining a food bank or a community kitchen, etc. So I think that it's interesting to see how many people say that after the crisis, the only thing that they don't want to lose is that sense of we, because we're of course social beings and we thrive in community. So I think that cities have a really important role in recognizing and enabling us to thrive through all of these roles, and recognize all the ways in which we can create value. So, as I said before, we started and we created a framework of the city portrait to downscale the donuts into cities with Amsterdam. So Amsterdam was the first city to publish the first ever city portrait back in April 2020. They also embraced publicly that they would use the donuts as their conceptual framework to transform the city. They also had an amazing group of residents coming up to form the Amsterdam Doughnut Coalition, who is working in parallel and driving change from the community up. So what we did is very short after, in July 2020, we made public, we shared the methodology that we had used with Amsterdam so that other places could get inspired and could use it in their own place. And what we're seeing is that the inspiration between some places and others is just incredibly powerful. So we've seen since then lots of towns and cities around the world that have followed the example of Amsterdam and that are creating their own methodology and their own adaptation, not only in cities, but at different scales. So we're seeing examples of neighborhoods in Birmingham or regions such as Brussels, but also nations like Costa Rica or Curacao. And we're also excited to see that these initiatives are not only led by governments, but also by the community. So I spoke about the Amsterdam Doughnut Coalition. They were pioneers in spontaneously form this self-organizing group, which has inspired other groups worldwide. And what we're seeing is that communities and local groups worldwide are just picking up these frameworks and putting them into practice in ways that we had never expected. So it's just really exciting to see also the energy that there's in that way of organizing. And this is an example of what we're seeing coming through. We're just delighted to see how groups are just bringing so many adaptations of the donuts, from a Maori reinterpretation of the donuts to how it's being used, for instance, as I was saying, in Costa Rica as part of the regeneration journey of the country. And so we're in a very different space from the one that we started. We have left behind the starting point, or the traditional starting point of supply and demand. We've also left behind the rational economic man and this goal of never-ending growth. We're in a space of a much more interesting space where the goal is to thrive in balance, and where we explore holistically the future we want for our cities, taking into account not only local aspirations, but also our global responsibility. And we know we need to transform our economies to be distributive and regenerative by design. And also we are social beings who thrive in community, and we recognize our multiple economic roles. And also the economy, it's a much more holistic system, which is embedded itself in society and the living world. So if all of this is interesting for you, what I really invite you is to join Doughnut Economics Action Lab. We have created this platform precisely to connect and empower everyone who wants to put the ideas into practice, and also to share how everyone is innovating, and so we can inspire others. We think that really spreading the ideas in this way through changemakers and self-organizing groups is the most effective way that we've found so far to bring the transformation needed in a decade that there's just no time to lose. So thank you very much for listening today. This is all for me right now, and I think that we can go into a conversation. I'm very looking forward to it. Thank you, everyone.
Yay, thank you very much, Carlota. Exciting. I immediately got inspired by these local stories of peer-to-peer communities. And yeah, and actually it seems like we can make one here in Kiev, and we already have
Absolutely.
Inspiration from you. We already have open access to the city portrait methodology. So why not to start if local municipality will not be against it. I hope they won't be. We do have several questions though, and I will ask them. Well, first of all, I think it's very relevant to talk about this issue. Can circular economy decouple economic growth from pressure on environment? And how do you see the role of circular economy in deploying doughnut economy? That question, I think, will be coming from many people, so it's important to react on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we think that circular economy is definitely one of the must tools that we need if we want to aim for a regenerative and cyclical system. So when we talk in Doughnut Economics about going from a linear industrial system towards a circular one or a regenerative one, that circular economy is for sure one of the vehicles that will bring us there. We are in fact working a lot with organizations that are whose focus is in circular economy, in bringing this lens to the donuts. I think that what Doughnut Economics also brings is a bit of the wider picture. So we of course need circular economy, and we need to be regenerative by design, but we also need to be distributive by design. So we need to bring the social element. So what I think is really exciting, it's more and more to see organizations whose focus until now has been mainly circular economy, to actually stepping back and looking a bit at the wider picture and bringing together both, right, the social and the ecological together. And so I think it's definitely very exciting, and circular economy, it's a huge ally of Doughnut Economics, and we're excited to see more and more innovations. I mean, I think there's so much technology and innovations that can happen through that vehicle that will for sure determine whether we have a chance to live in the doughnut or not.
Thank you. Indeed, I think so as well. I will unite several questions into one because they are quite similar. So there is one, how to create doughnut economics model for my city in India. But we also have questions like, how can we adopt doughnut economy in developing countries?
Yeah.
And again, you say there are no developing countries, so please, participants, take that into account. There are no developing countries, but there is an important remark, especially fossil-based countries. So I can imagine, Eastern countries that are very much dependent on oil or maybe gas. How do they adapt doughnut model?
Yeah, so this is a really great question. I didn't mention it through my presentation. So we started creating these frameworks and downscaling the doughnut to places in the so-called global north, because that's where we started, and that's where the energy at the beginning came. And also we think that there is a big responsibility of those countries who have massively overshooted through history the planet, and therefore they really need to transform. So we started there, but we're very, very excited to work with other countries, especially in lower income countries who have different realities, and who, as I was saying in the slide where I was showing the different countries, they are countries with lower income and maybe in a different stage of traditional development. They have a massive opportunity to transform in different ways and to develop in different ways. So for me, the question is, how can this countries really see this as an opportunity to bring in the innovations needed so that meeting the needs of all people in their country happens without pursuing the same dependency on the same degrading processes that we've done before. So there's for sure a huge potential there. We have been indeed for the past year working with several organizations and groups in different countries such as India, Costa Rica. There's been a few countries coming together with us in a process of adapting this methodology to different regions in the world and with different realities. And we're very excited. We're going to be publishing some of that, hopefully in the next coming months, so that also other countries with different realities can apply this framework. So the question of how can we start the Doughnut in India, I would say, well, first of all, please join our platform. There's already a lot of people connecting there, and I can't remember if there is an active group in India, but if there's no one, I would say let's just come here. There's a space for creating an event and bringing people from your place together. I mean, we can obviously, the deal team is here to support those who want to initiate, so we can connect you with like-minded people or share the resources that might be useful. But yeah, for sure, it's an area that it's a priority for us. In the past month, it's like, how can we work more with those countries that are not in the so-called global north, so that they can also use this opportunity to become pioneers. So there's also an opportunity to be pioneering a different way of showing what success and what progress means. And of course, I also said in my presentation, they also need, it's about these countries and it's about the relationships with other countries. So how can, what is the kind of support, help, that also other countries from the global, like from the so-called global north need in order to transform differently and to grow and develop differently.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. I think it's very much all about on what do you spend your oil money.
Exactly.
How are you thinking? Yes. Okay, and there is a long one. I have to read this. There are some small island states that argue that their per capita pollution rates are high, but their global impact is low. The costs to shift their industries to be cleaner can actually lead to burdensome complications to its people. How would Doughnut Economics treat or emphasize with such transitionary dilemmas?
Yeah, I mean, every place, of course, is very different, and I think it's for the people in that place, obviously, to really take those dilemmas and explore it. What we're really, I think that the framework of the four lenses really helps, because it puts the local aspirations in the context of the global impact. So I think that starting by actually having a collective conversation in that place with that holistic picture of what would it mean to thrive in this place while respecting the rest of the living world, I think that is a starting point. Let's have that conversation. And what is the kind of future that we want in our city? And what are the kinds of transformations? What are the kinds of industries that we need to shift, maybe to ensure that when we are tackling global impact, we're of course not doing it in detriment of the people here, right? So I think that using these tools that we are creating with the community to help us see everything in a much more connected and interrelated way could help places, because I mean this dilemma it's a dilemma in most of the places worldwide right now, right? So what we're trying to do is to bring conversations. Let's have a conversation of how some policies would impact others, because I think that some of the issues that we're seeing right now as well is that some of the policies that sometimes are being put, they're being created completely in isolation. So sometimes we are, of course, improving one part, but we are not taking into account the social. And that's why I think that the Doughnut Economics and the 4 lenses, the city portrait methodology really helps to undertake these conversations and bring all the stakeholders in the same place together and to a common understanding.
Yeah, thank you so much. Then, okay, we move to another one, and it's again very similar one. I have to say maybe your previous response applies to that. So if yes, just tell that. Can Doughnut economics be applied in Asian countries like Singapore with less natural resources and ability to self-sustain, to be self-sustainable?
Yes, I mean, what I think is really interesting of Doughnut economics, or the approach that we're taking to downscaling or applying the donut in one place or the other, is that we are really aiming for localization and make it local, in the sense that what does it mean? What does it mean to think about thriving people in a thriving planet here in Singapore? So that will be very different to what it means to Amsterdam, and the way and the policies and the strategies and the action plans that come out of there are completely different, and the conversations are completely different. So I think that one of the exciting things, I think, of that the donut, or the way in which we're downscaling the donut, brings is precisely that it opens the possibility to bring it to a place, to a specific place with a specific context. So it's not so much about comparing, but about really focusing on what's happening here and what would it mean for Singapore. It's going to be completely different of what it means, for Brussels or Amsterdam, for sure.
Yeah, and here comes my question, because you are working with many people across the world and continents and countries, but it seems to me that those people in Amsterdam, they went quite far, and all the others are lagging much behind them. Being a bit aware of their municipality practices, of their ecosystem, I want to ask your opinion. What were those prerequisites that allowed this community and municipality to be so much ready for this concept and to embrace it like instantly?
Yeah. This is a great question, and we're also trying to find the answer at Deal. So it's a great question. In fact, we were brainstorming a bit a week ago about, what is it that makes a city, really successful in this. And of course, Amsterdam. What we're seeing in Amsterdam, and what I've seen in Amsterdam so far, it's that they're really owning it within the whole city. Yeah. So they're just going one step beyond, even one step beyond us. So it's always, we need to. They're really owning it. So I think that they had a very ambitious plan and ambitious targets in terms of circular economy, and they very quickly realized that they had to go bigger. And I think there was extremely courageous politicians in that moment, and they are now also driving the project, which is not easy in a world where we elect our politicians every 4 years. So I think that there's been a lot of that, like, kind of leadership really taking, they're being brave to actually say we're experimenting, where they're opening spaces for experimentation, for going one step beyond. And then I think it's also, there's a lot of active participation and activism in the city. So also this residents community, throughout the whole city, you can see that they're pushing for that change. So those kind of things come together, and it's something that they are doing, we're supporting, we are kind of following and trying to be as supporting and take the steps that really help them. So I think that it's been definitely a lot of courage, and they're being ambitious and really true to what they're claiming. Next week, I was saying you before, Roman, where there's been a whole week in Amsterdam going on around the state of the donut, because it's been more than a year now. And so, the city government, with also the Amsterdam Donut Coalition, and a lot of stakeholders are coming together in different events to talk together about, okay, so where are we with respect to these ambitions. And I think it's amazing. They're doing it. They're just doing it.
Yeah. Maybe it's about such a highly educated community that is given so much, this participation right. So you can really speak up, and you can, the decision making is decentralized, knowledges are shared, businesses and governments are cooperating. So basically, in 2019, we held in Kiev this European Circular Economy Forum, and I asked the professor from Delft, how was it possible to set a goal to become a circular country without understanding how to do it?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And that's their courage, that's their braveness that you are probably talking about. So they are setting the direction, and then businesses and NGOs, they are picking it up. So they all are on one page, and they are just trying to do their part, and it's moving, which is fantastic to me.
Fantastic. It's really inspiring, and we are also seeing, they were the first, but we're seeing followers. And even though maybe they haven't been yet so public, I think there's amazing things going on elsewhere. And I hope that more and more we're going to be able to share more stories also of what's happening in other places, with different realities and of course different conditions. But I think it's also interesting to see how the followers are coming into it, and they're bringing new innovations and new ways of doing it. I mean, Amsterdam is doing great, but of course it's not perfect as anything else, as anything is, right? So yeah, really, we're also it's also an experiment for us. We're really learning from experiment and action. So we hope that in the next couple of years we can also draw some more insights and patterns of what is happening. Great,
thank you. We will still have 2 questions. I think we have time for that. Do you know of practitioners or groups that use Doughnut Economics to connect impact funds with entrepreneurial opportunities?
Great question. Actually, we haven't spoke much about business in this context. So I'm going to actually step back, and instead of responding exactly to that question, I just want to share a bit of where we are with business and with entrepreneurs and investment, because I think it's important so that you understand my answer. But yeah, I think that in designing deal and the way in which we were going to spread the ideas, we've taken a very open approach to it. So we've given concepts and ideas and put them in the commons to invite change makers in the different areas like cities, governments, education, to play with them, innovate, and put them into action in their way. When it comes to business and entrepreneurs, we are being very much careful. So there's always been a dilemma in deal of how to balance openness with integrity, with keeping the integrity of the concept. And we've seen that in the space of business, this integrity there's a big risk of being co-opted, greenwashed, misused. And we say a deal that when there's a really radical idea that meets business, and as usual, one of them is going to be transformed, and we want to make sure that business is transformed, not the donut or not Doughnut Economics. So that has led us to take very conservative steps with our approach and our direction in businesses. We for now have kind of been holding that space. We've put out there the core kind of ideas of business and the donut, but we haven't been active actually in that space or working in that space. We actually asked for businesses to really follow some strict conditions on how the donut can be and cannot be used publicly, which is they're all in our website. Meaning that haven't done that much work in that space yet, but we are very excited. A couple of weeks ago, we brought into the team our business and enterprise lead, who's gonna start working, and we're starting working to see how and when can we start to open this space of business in a way that it's really transformative and that it keeps the transformational potential of the donut. So I hope that in a few, months, year, we can actually have a better response into that and connect other change makers. But right now, yeah, we're taking it carefully, with a lot of care, the work in businesses.
Wow, great. I will be looking forward to that, and respect your statement, because we do it in the same way.
Yeah,
Over here. And probably the last one. How do you see the role of government open data on the path to Doughnut Economics? Is it important to have an open data from the government?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I didn't go into that detail actually, but with regards to being distributive by design as well, the way in which we are sharing data and who owns the data matters a lot. So we're actually seeing some pioneer places and cities that are taking a step into that. Barcelona, it's one of them. I think it's a great example of a city that has actually recognized that the data and it's of the residents, and they're creating a lot of infrastructure for sharing that data and for making people owning that data. So I definitely think it plays a huge role. It's part of what it would fall under also, becoming distributive by design. We need, who owns things matters a lot. So who owns the data matters as well, very much.
Indeed. Thank you so much. Okay, guys, if there are no more questions, then we will be wrapping up, and it's almost time. So thank you, Carlota. Thank you so much for this inspiration and insights, and we hope to cooperate with you also in future. And
absolutely,
I hope there will be an active Ukrainian group, Doughnut Action Group, very soon, so then we can ask your supervision, advice, and maybe participate in your initiatives as well.
Great. It's been lovely to be here. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much. And guys, enjoy your day. Thank you for joining us today.
Have a lovely day, everyone. Bye-bye. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.